session?
Yeah, my plan is to do that.
Okay.
I'm looking at the list of stuff I still want to talk about.
So then, and then dinner. No. We'll have this session, and then we will go for lunch. And lunch will. And my profound apologies for those of you that didn't get word that we were meeting in here instead of. And so I hope you didn't miss a ton while you were in Garrett waiting for us, going, "Why are we all alone? Has the rapture occurred?" And no one filled me in. I thought it was post-millennial, but sorry, that's a little dispensational joke. We will head over for lunch after this session. If your children are in childcare, grab them, because most certainly we want them to eat, unless you're punishing them for something, and then you can leave them in there. But otherwise, grab your kids, come on over to Garrett, and we'll have lunch together, and that'll wrap things up. Nikki said that there are gluten-free options on the counter in front of the kitchen. Otherwise, everything else is already on the tables or will be on the tables waiting for you. It's a light lunch, so don't get disappointed if you come in, you go, "Oh, really?" I was just talking to my daughter about a charcuterie tray, and she goes, "That's dinner?" It's a light lunch, but I'm sure you'll love it, and just spend some time with some good fellowship before you head out. So I want to tell you one quick story. When I was in high school, I was not a believer, and so, obviously believers do dumb things. Well, I did dumber things before I was a believer. One of the dumb things we did was there was a guy down the street that, for one reason or another, we didn't get along, and a few of us decided we wanted to go decorate the trees in his yard with toilet paper. Anybody ever TP houses when you're, okay, good. Man, that's most of you. Okay, who didn't TP a house? Raise your hand. So we went over to decorate this guy's house. And I was with like hardcore TPers. Because I'm like, one roll of Charmin and I'm pretty good. But these guys are doing that, and they're like wadding up toilet paper and stuffing it up their exhaust pipes, so that if they tried to chase us, their cars wouldn't start. Well, and then the topper was one guy found the Rainbird sprinkler and put it on the front step, aimed at the door, and then rang the doorbell. And it took off and cranked on the sprinkler. So they opened the door and it was all through the living room. And so, of course, we did all this, and then everybody took off running because the guys who were our age came piling out of the house. And we went running. Now, my physique at that point in my life, not that it's anything great now for sure, but then it was much worse. It was like, take this body and put it in a trash compactor, and that's about what I looked like. And so who is at the end of the line when we were running away? Moi. And so everybody takes off, and they're like blocks away, and I'm like, and they catch up to me. Yeah, but I managed to elude them with my special set of skills that I had. And so you don't remember this? Well, so then about 2 days later, I'm at my next door neighbor's house, and there's a knock on the door. And my next door neighbor opens the door, and it's the guy who was chasing me. And he's standing on the doorstep looking at me. He goes, "Why don't you come out here?" And I'm like, make me. Inside the house, I'm going, "No, I think I'm good." He goes, "No, really, come out here." And there's like 3 other guys. And I'm thinking, this is the end of my life, and I'm about done. Into this fray walks my big brother. And he comes and he stands in between them and me, and he goes, "You need something?" And the guys went, poof, and ran away. And I always remembered that because of that sense of protection that a big brother can offer. As you heard today, big brothers can be not so great, and little brothers can be really annoying. But I'm proud to tell you that even in my darkest moments of TPing homes, my big brother came to save me. And so you get to hear from him one more time. So come on up. There's no toilet paper here. You're safe.
I got to tell you, now I'm a big believer in repressed memories, because I have no memory of that happening. That you were a felon. It's who does this stuff?
I was in jail and you visited
All right. Oh my gosh, what a bad boy.
I think you told Mom.
Well, I would hope so. We need to turn this behavior around. I mean, I remember, one of my memories was that I was a very bad boy in that I never liked going to church when I was a kid. And my mom decided that we needed to go to church because she believed that if you don't go to church, you're probably not going to go to heaven. Which, back in the day, that was the whole reason for going to church, so that when you die, you go to heaven. And I remember her saying, you got to, and I'm like, I did not like church, and I would fake like I was sleeping. Maybe she'll let me sleep. And I remember her saying one time, if you don't change your attitude and start going to church, God is probably going to call you to be a pastor. Thinking that doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, I said, that is not going to happen. And anyway, there I was, pastor. We got 1 hour left, or an hour and 3 minutes to be exact. And I got a couple of things I really want to talk about. But Terry, who came up and made a bid for connection by bringing me an almond joy, always works, mentioned two things that I want to be sure that I mention. And that is this. When we talk about bids for connection or repair attempts, oftentimes you might think I'm talking, or your person is talking about what we say to them. Like, hey, good morning, or will you forgive me? Those are bids for connection and bids for repair. But like she made a very good point. A lot of times bids for connection and repair attempts are not verbal at all. Sometimes it's just a touch on the arm, Sometimes it's a wink, And so, just so you know that a bid for connection oftentimes could be just like a little nudge or something. So it doesn't always have to be verbal. I must be getting close to the end of this thing because this is not wanting to stay on me. So I probably have not much time left before it disintegrates. Okay, so I want to talk about two things basically. But the second thing we're going to talk about you may look at it and go, babe, let's just leave early because we're a long way from empty nest. No, you're not. It's going to happen like that. So the empty nest syndrome piece, I think, is pretty important, so don't leave, okay? But before we get there, what I want to do is I want to kind of put what I would call a bow on our discussion this morning. And the bow is this. Oftentimes, what makes the difference in our relationships, besides all the stuff we've talked about so far, what puts a bow on it oftentimes is our ability to grow up and to mature. Scripture talks about this so much, about how important it is to become mature. In fact, the mission statement of the church I go to talks about wanting to present everyone mature in Christ. That's one of our big mission, one of our goals as a church. And so what I want to talk to you about is what I call the 8 building blocks of maturity. And this is not gonna be a long, drawn out, boring piece, but I do want to talk to you about these. How many of you have ever taken a class in child development at any point in your educational career? Most of you have, okay. So you may remember a theorist by the name of Erik Erikson. Anybody remember Erik Erikson? Yeah, Erik Erikson had how many stages of psychosocial development? Michelle, come on, you know this. 8, exactly. 8 stages of psychosocial development. And so I got very interested in this. My whole approach to doing therapy, a big part of the approach that I use to doing therapy is that I think it's very important to understand how life has acted on a person's experience. And oftentimes, it's been the interruptions in the developmental process that have led people to struggle in life. And what Erikson has these 8 stages of psychosocial development or psychosocial growth. I'm kind of rewritten this into the 8 building blocks of maturity. In other words, these are 8 things that I think you accumulate or not over the course of your life that lead to a life of maturity, okay? And I think really all Erik Erikson did was basically uncover God's architecture for human development. So here are the 8 building blocks of maturity, and so I'm going to just start and go through. The first building block of maturity is is trust. Now, when Erickson would talk about trust, he always, in all of the stages, he always posed the building block or the stage of life as something versus something. For example, the first stage of life was trust versus mistrust. So basically what he was saying is in the first 18 months of life, you either get a sense of trust for the world around you or distrust of the world around you. And it's all dependent on what the experiences are in your first 18 months. Most of us don't remember the first 18 months very clearly, but in the first 18 months of life, his point is, you're a baby, your first 18 months of life, basically the world revolves around you. You don't really have a sense that you are a piece of a bigger puzzle. To a 0 to 18 month old who's trying to develop trust, babies are extremely self-centered. Have you ever noticed that? Extremely self-centered. And so one of the things that we know about trust is that in the first 18 months of life, depending on who is taking care of you, you'll either experience trust or not, or lack trust. And so in the first 18 months of life, how do you normally market your needs? You cry. I mean, that's just how you let people know there's something wrong. Now, if you grew up in a family that was a nurturing, a caring, loving family, your parents said, okay, this baby is crying. There's only 5 things that could be wrong: tired, wet, dirty, hungry, or lonely. And you went through the decision tree, and those of you who have kids, you go, okay, why is this kid crying? Tired, wet, dirty, hungry, or lonely? And once you figure out what it is, oh, this child is hungry. And so you feed this child, what happens? Crying stops. What's that child learning if that happens repeatedly? The world is a place I can trust. All I have to do is put my needs out there, and it happens for me. Trust, very important. That's the first building block of maturity. Second one is autonomy. Autonomy is that sense that, from the ages of, say, like 2 to 4 years old, where you get this sense that, you know what? There's a great world out there. You finally figure out that you and mommy are not the same person. And, you do things like learn how to walk, learn how to go to the bathroom all by yourself. Maybe even learn to tie your shoes. You become your own person. There's a sense of autonomy. Third stage, and third building block, initiative. You're 5 years old and you start thinking, oh my gosh, there's a preschool here in town, a kindergarten. I think I'll take some classes. This is the sense that when you get to be between 5 and 7, I'm going to try some stuff out. That's a natural kind of a tendency or a natural impulse that children have around this age. They want to try some stuff out. And in our culture, that can mean not just going to kindergarten. It can mean playing soccer, or going out for a sport. Our kids wanted to try everything, and so they tried sports and so on. They tried music. Our son decided he wanted to learn how to play the guitar. We said, how about the piano first? And so he took piano lessons, became an excellent pianist. He's a great guitarist. He plays several different instruments. That was a thing where he expressed initiative. We gave him opportunity, and he loved it. Some kids, you put them into soccer, you put them into music or whatever it is, and they try it for like a little tiny while, and they're like, this is not for me. Smart parents go, okay, that's all right. Try something else. Life is a smorgasbord. Try as many things as you want. This is how you figure out what you're good at. But you reward the initiative. Okay? Now, I want to stop right here before we go on because I want to insert one little point, and that's this. Do things always go smoothly in our development? No. Sometimes things happen in the course of a developmental life. Sometimes parents get divorced. Sometimes people die. Sometimes there's a car accident. Trauma happens. And in the course of developing and accumulating the building blocks of maturity, in a young life, if something happens at a sensitive age, psychologists refer to a thing called arrested development or a developmental interruption, whatever you want, or whatever term you want to use. And what happens basically is, let's say that kid is expressing, initiative and they're like trying new things out. And then something happens. Maybe their parents split up. Really traumatic for this child. Oftentimes what happens, and a lot of times parents don't recognize this happening, is it interrupts the developmental flow in that kid's life. And in my terminology, they miss that piece. They don't get the chip in that piece of development. And so you can keep on growing, because one of the things that happens is that you may have your development arrested at 3 or 4 or whatever it is, but guess what? Your body keeps growing. Life keeps moving on. You have to eventually go to first grade and then second grade and keep going. But for a lot of kids, they keep moving on, but maybe they never did finish that developmental task. So if you think about this, if the first building block is trust, and let's say in the first 18 months of life, some major trauma happens to that child. Could you think, when you're in your 20s or 30s, could not getting the trust chip affect your life 30 or 40 years later? Of course it can. These things are essential pieces of the maturity puzzle. And for those of us who get our development interrupted at one of those pieces, one of those places, it is such good news when you go to a therapist and the therapist goes, well, tell me about your life. And you go through the whole thing. You start recite what the things that happened. And they say, oh, but there was this trauma that happened when I was, say, 6 years old. My parents got a divorce. Could there be a link in why that person came to you for therapy? Because they're saying, I just haven't really been involved in any relationships. I don't have any, there's no initiative to go seek somebody else out. Or I have very low initiative, so I've never really gotten a career. And see, a good therapist can help you understand kind of what are the pieces that might be missing in my developmental journey? Because these pieces are all building blocks that come together in the end to produce a mature, vital life. Making sense? Okay, so that's initiative. But between 8 and 11, that's a challenge for competence. That's where a kid, I trust the world. I feel like I'm my own person. I've tried a few things. And now I realize I've been trying 3 or 4 different things. You know what? I'm really good at the piano. I have a sense of competence. I have a sense that I can, what my ability is there, and I can do some cool stuff. What does that do to my self-esteem? It's great, 12 to 19, the next piece comes along. That's the identity piece. You go onto any high school campus and you just take a look at kids, watch kids at lunchtime, Kids, what are they doing? They're all meeting with little groups. And do the groups all look the same? No. I mean, there's like, there's a group of like, say, athletes. They get together at lunch and they all sit together. And if you're not an athlete, you're not going to have lunch with these people, because these people, they're all athletes. Maybe there are people who are involved in the drama club. I mean, you're not having lunch with the drama people. I mean, you may not even want to, because you think they're weird, the drama group. There's all these different, like, what's going on? These are kids trying on identities. They get together with this group. If they don't feel like they fit, they try another group. That's the stage of life where I want to try to figure out, who am I going to be? How am I going to identify in my development? That's an important stage. The next stage, you get into your into your 20s. Sociologists call the 20s the decade of mate selection. It's a super romantic term, but that's when you are at a place in your life when you start to investigate relationships in a real earnest level. And you might be looking for a person that you want to spend the rest of your life with in a close, intimate relationship. And during the 12 to 19, during the 20s, that's where you're really developing your ability to be intimate. Now, if you didn't get something like trust or initiative or competence, can you see how it might affect your life in the 20s? Maybe you don't have the initiative. You didn't get that initiative chip, and so you don't date much. You don't really you're not really into seeking out relationships, and it can really affect you. Intimacy is a very important piece of the developmental puzzle. You hit your 30s to your 60s, that's a big stage. And so I've broken that one down into sub-stages. Productivity is the stage where you finally, you've grown up, you've kind of gone out on your own, you've got your education. This is the stage of life where you really start to make your mark in the world, And so you're becoming productive in your own way. And, we all define productivity in different ways. Some people define productivity in terms of how much money we make. Some people it's how many people we can help. Some, all different ways to define productivity. But there are like these little sub-stages. You get into this productivity stage and you start going. Sometimes people are hit right in the face with something called midlife transition. And you've reached, it's where you wake up one day and you realize, you know what, half my life is over, you know? And I don't like what I do. Or I love what I do, but half my life is over. And I want to do more. I want to be known for more. And so you go and you buy a red Miata, you know, or some whatever you do to just kind of like change it up a little bit. Or, pardon me? A white Challenger. Okay, is that was your car. Okay, all right, good. Yeah, excellent. That's how you're experiencing it. I don't want my life to go by without driving that white Challenger like 100 miles an hour on these country roads. That's just like the feeling of freedom. Yeah, that's midlife transition. The next one that I think a lot of us have to deal with, particularly people who are Christians, is we have to figure out the difference between success and significance. You know, for a lot of us, for a lot of people in the world, the productivity stage is marked with how much money can I make, or how far can I go up a corporate ladder, or how much stuff could I accumulate, you know, because that will mean that I'm successful to me and maybe even to other people. But oftentimes that becomes a crisis, because I talk to a lot of people who are very successful, and they come in to talk to me and they say, I'm successful, I've done all these things. I can see that. It's a nice Porsche you just drove up in. And they're like, but I'm not happy. I don't have any satisfaction in my life. Well, that's where we have a discussion about what's the difference between success and significance. And good pastors talk about how you become significant. You realize your spiritual gifts. You get involved in a community. You give back. You allow yourself to see yourself as a vessel that God works through, as someone that God fills with good things, so that you can have a significant life. Then you face what's called the empty nest. That's another little mini stage. That's when your kids leave. And you always think from the very beginning, when that's going to happen, you think, this is going to be great when these kids are gone. And I have to say, it really was. Terry and I have enjoyed the empty nest stage thoroughly, you know, in our life. But some people aren't ready for it, you know, and that stage comes on them, and they all of a sudden feel extremely lonely, you know. The last stage is what I call the legacy stage. I'm going through these super fast, but I want you to just to get a feel for, you know, where you are in life or what you're struggling with could have something to do with where you are, you know, in the stages of life, and whether or not you've accumulated all of the maturity chips along the way. Legacy. The legacy stage is that stage you reach, and it isn't necessarily relegated to age. It could be 60s, could be 70s. You could start living a legacy stage, you know, in your 50s even probably. But that's the stage where you begin to realize, man, you know, I've done all these things, I've had all these experiences, I've done all this growth, and now the question is the last chapter of my life going to be about me? Or is it going to be about living a legacy because of all I've received over the course of my life? What do I want my legacy to be? You know, and I witness oftentimes when people reach the legacy stage, a dramatic fork in the road when it comes to development. You're going through all these stages, you go through productivity, and then when you hit the legacy stage, there's a developmental fork in the road. I've never seen an exception to this. Some people think, in fact, Terry and I had a discussion about this. She goes, you know, that's pretty binary. I don't know if I really buy that it's one or the other. That's kind of, it is. Trust me. I think you go in one or the other direction. I think when you hit that stage, and some of you are going to relate with this because you know someone who is in this stage. You know, let's say they're in later years. They're in their maybe late 60s, 70s, 80s, or beyond. They reach this stage, and they go in one or the other direction. One direction is their life becomes all about leaving a legacy for others. And they talk about, you know, they have wisdom that they can dispense, and they're the kind of person that young people want to hang out with and get, you know, information from and grow in their wisdom. There's another side to this, and it's what I call the self-absorbed stage. And I will tell you, I think that our natural default as humans is towards self-absorption. We start self-absorbed. Remember the first stage of life, 0 to 18 months? You know, you're a little baby. It's all about you, isn't it? And as you mature, you begin to realize, hey, it's not just about me. It's about other people too. I got to learn to fit in, you know? And so you spend your whole life fitting in or not, depending on your journey. Then you get to the end of your life, and guess what? Same challenge. Self-absorbed or other-focused. Terry had two grandmas. I always kind of end with this little story. I call it a tale of two grandmas. She had a grandma who was who died at 101 years old. She was an amazing woman, 101 years old. And Grandma, I loved hanging out with Grandma. In fact, I remember she was toward the end of her life. At one point, she was suffering from depression, and I remember her telling me, you know, I think I've got depression. You know, and I said, well, Grandma, I mean, we can get you an antidepressant. I mean, we can. That's a problem that's easily fixed. I remember her saying, well, I wouldn't want to get addicted to anything. I'm like, my grandma, do you know, where's this going? I mean, you're like 100 years old. I mean, they're not going to put you in a halfway house. I mean, so, but I mean, she was, whenever she's on her deathbed, I go to visit her in the nursing home, and she sees me come in, she goes, hey, how you doing? And she wanted to know all about my life. How's your practice going? You know, how many clients are you seeing this week? Tell me about, and she wanted me to tell her stories about she's not even my grandma. I mean, she was my grandma, but she's Terry's grandma. She just was all about how everybody else is doing, wanting to know how you're doing. Terry had another grandma who was married for many, many years to a very abusive alcoholic husband. And this guy he was super mean. Later on in life, this guy's life turned around, but it was too late for them. And that grandma, ultimately had divorced him, but that grandma was very negatively affected by this guy. There was a tremendous amount of hurt. Well, that grandma also met and married another man, and they had I don't even know how many years they were married, but many, many years, probably almost 50 years together. And this guy, and she got along great. But, the thing was, you get together with that grandma, you couldn't have a conversation almost where she wouldn't recite how bitter and angry she was about first husband. Despite the fact that she found this guy who loved her and adored her, and they had a life together, that grandma was completely trapped in her pain and in her hurt. And most of the conversations with her would be self-absorbed. She couldn't get beyond it. This grandma was 101 years old. Want to know what's going on in my life? The reason I tell that story is because regardless of where you are in life stage-wise, you have a choice to make, and the sooner you make the choice, the better. What direction am I going to go? Am I going to allow life to take me in a self-absorbed, make it all about me, be locked in my hurt, not grow, not mature, not develop, not leave something in the world that I could leave the world, as opposed to being concerned about other people and leaving a legacy? And a church is a great place to focus your legacy. Terry and I, for years and years and years, taught Sunday school with young kids, all the way up, followed them all the way up. Our last small group was a lot of these kids as they're getting married to the same kids we knew in first grade. We've got legacy, We've poured ourselves into their lives. And I'm not saying we're great people, because we didn't do the greatest job, and it wasn't always super smooth. But over the course of time, we've recognized the difference between how we're going to focus the rest of our lives. It's super important to do. And my encouragement to you is to realize the life that God has given you as being a life that's potent and that God wants to use and He wants to channel. And ask Him regularly, am I doing, am I being, am I growing in the direction that will ultimately bring legacy to this life that you, God, have gifted me with. Make sense? So let's talk about what happens with empty nest syndrome, because that's one of the things that a legacy can really affect, and that is, what is empty nest syndrome? The empty nest syndrome is really a thing. People talk about it and they go, "Oh, is that really a thing?" It is a thing, and it's the grief that a lot of parents feel once their kids leave home, particularly if they haven't developed a sense of legacy. And let's say your life has been all about those little precious children that you've been raising, and then they leave, and you're like, what now what? What happens in a lot of cases in American culture is that marriages put their relationship on hold while they're raising their kids. I've talked to many couples who say, when I ask them if they have a rich dating life, as married, are you kidding? We have 3 kids. There's no way we could date. And then one of them will inevitably say to me, and I'm almost quoting this verbatim, "Now is the season of our life where we're raising our kids. We'll come back to us later." And I said, "You'll also come back to me." Because it doesn't work that way. Like I've tried to say since the beginning of this thing, it's how you work at nurturing and developing your relationships today that makes a difference in the future. Empty nest is this place where some of the symptoms of empty nest, if you're wondering if it's you, is a sense of loss of purpose. Your whole life was about getting to kids to a million things and making sure that everything was perfect for them. And maybe you even have to admit that maybe you were a helicopter parent or a snowplow parent, and you did all this stuff to try to help them avoid, calamity. Maybe now you have some feelings of emptiness. Maybe you feel a little bit frustrated because they're gone. You don't really have the same kind of control over a little life that you used to have. Your spouse is like, "Whoa, hold on, I'm not your kid." If you were a helicopter, snowplow, or other type of extreme parent, you may be freaked out now by not, because you don't feel like you're as influential in a life as you were before, because your whole life was about those kids. And you ask yourself, what if they make mistakes? What if they what if they fall? What if they have problems? Another symptom is emotional distress on our part. We have sad days that the kids are gone. We're bummed out that we weren't more available. I've got guilt and maybe a little bit of regret. And maybe you're now nervous about your own current marriage situation or your own other relationships because you poured everything into those relationships, but now those kids are gone. And now what are you going to do? And you're scared of aging. And you're frustrated because you've been waiting to get to this stage of your life your whole life, and it doesn't feel very good anymore. It's not very satisfying. So what do empty nesters need? Number one, for a lot of empty nesters, it's really important that they adjust to the quiet. A lot of people have a hard time with the quiet, adjust to the sense of loss. Things have really changed, and it feels like loss when you hit that empty nest for a lot of folks, if you don't have a plan for how you're going to deal with that. And this could also get complicated if you're facing retirement or you have some marital problems. There's a phenomenon now that therapists talk about called the 30-year bubble. It's this upsurge in divorce among people who've been married 30 years because a lot of us are healthier than we thought we might be at this point. And we think, people get to this stage and their kids are gone and their marriage is kind of, stale. And they think, well, I'm not going to spend my last 20 or 30 years of breathing with this person. I can get out of this and do something new. So marital stress. Anxiety about your children. Maybe you're worried about how they're going to do. Even though they're adults, they're out of college, they're working, you're worried about how they're going to do. You're going to wonder if they remembered to fill in the blank, do their taxes, take care of their own children, blah, 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 blah. You're concerned about whether you prepared them for life. You see how you're beginning to move in this direction already? Because you made your life all about them, and now it's all about, did I do everything right? So one of the things, and so the other thing too is, if you are going to decide to stay together in your relationship, you adjusted to parenthood as a as a stage of life. Now you're adjusting you're adjusting to the legacy stage, and you're adjusting to empty nest. That's a stage of life. It's not this huge barrier or problem you've encountered. It's a stage of life. You need to see it as a stage. That's the most healthy way to see it. And so what I always like to talk about with empty nest people is the number one issue is what I call transactional issue. Now, back in the 60s, I wasn't in psychology back then. I was a little young, but there was a theorist who came up with an approach to psychology. And those of you who have studied psychology may remember this. It was called transactional analysis. Anybody ever heard of transactional analysis? Awesome. Okay. TA is what it was called. And you might remember how it was based, but this is so helpful in understanding how to interact with adult children and how to understand your role as an empty nester, or even your role in the church as you interact with younger people. They don't even have to be your relatives. But the whole concept of TA started with understanding that there were these basically 3 parts to your personality. Everybody here has, every person has a parent as a part of their personality, an adult, a part of their personality, and a child as a part of their personality. Just, if you can imagine those 3 pieces active in your life. And what do I mean by that? Well, the parent is that part of you that is where all the shoulds and oughts. You know, if it's cold outside, you really should put a coat on. If you get a job, you really should pay your taxes. That's what you should do. Those are the shoulds. Those are the conversations you have with yourself or with other people that are the parent conversations. The other one is the adult. So this is shoulds, oughts. This is the adult. This is the reasonable, rational, responsible part of who you are. That's the adult. That's the grown-up in you. That's the person who, as you've gone through these stages, these building blocks of maturity, you've done all you can to become the most mature person you can. That's the adult part of your personality. Most of us also have what we call the child or the kid. And that the kid is that part of your life where that's fun-loving, carefree, maybe a little bit at times spoiled. So the parent, the adult, and the child. Now, all the time that you're so this is you, okay? And here's your child, your kid, your adult child, now an adult. That kid has a parent, an adult, and a child. All of the years that this little precious was growing up, you had transactions that looked like this. Your parent spoke to their child. Their child spoke to your parent. That's the kind of interaction you have. You would tell them, you should go to school on time. Did you get your homework done? Can you make me a sandwich? That kind of thing. Parent-child transaction. And, with your spouse or other adults, you will probably have adult-to-adult transactions. You have conversations all the time. Those are not parent-child. Those are adult-to-adult conversations. You might, if you're married to somebody or you're in a relationship, you might have, as an adult, you might have child-to-child interactions. It's fun-loving, carefree. Let's say, you and a bunch of adults go to Disneyland together, and you're just having a blast. You're interacting at the kid level. Now, so think about your adult child. You've raised this kid. A parent-child transaction. All of a sudden, your child begins to grow. They begin to mature, and now they are adults. And let's just go on the early side. They're 18 years old. The problem is that there's not some internal relationship clock that goes from, okay, 0 to age 18, and all of a sudden, the day that child reaches 18, click, all of a sudden, it's adult to adult. It doesn't work like that. The transition from parent to child, ideally, is marked with, slow transition. You go from parent to child slowly to adult. In other words, you're going from what we call cross transactions to what we would call congruent transactions. And once everybody's an adult, you can have congruent transactions at every level. If your kids have kids, you could talk parent to parent. If your kid calls up and says, hey, I'm thinking about getting into the stock market. And you say, well, let's talk about the stock market. This was not a very good week for the stock market, blah, blah. And you're having an adult-to-adult conversation. Or let's say the family decides to take a family vacation. You go somewhere super fun where everybody's having a blast. You're having child-to-child transactions. Everybody's a kid. Everybody's having, fun kid times. Part of the problem I see sometimes in empty nest families is that there's a failure to make the change from here to here. We don't think consciously about having transactions, even with our adult children at times, that are very adult. And we find ourselves stuck in the role of parent rather than peer. And I will say, my kids will still occasionally call and want to say, hey, Dad, what do you think about such and such? What should I do? But I got to tell you, if I need IT help, I'm totally willing to be the child and call my millennial kid who understands IT stuff so much better than I do. So I wanted to share this because so many people I talk to who are in the empty nest syndrome are in the empty nest syndrome because they're stuck in a transaction that isn't going anywhere, and it's frustrating because what happens if you have, let's say, a 30-year-old child or even an 18-year-old child, and you try to keep this up? What happens to the relationship? Anybody? Does it become a little stressful at times? Michelle? I think the child will try to withdraw. Yeah. Child will try to withdraw. And that's frustrating for a lot of parents because here you are in the empty nest syndrome and you want to have a relationship with your kid in that stage of life. But you cannot let go of this parent role. That's all you've done your whole life. It's hard for you to see that adult child as a mature adult. And so consequently, this becomes very stressful. Yeah.
That isn't just for parents, that's for grandparents also.
Absolutely. It's for grandparents as well as for children. Yes. Any relationships where and this is why, again, I go back to the whole idea of legacy. If you want to leave a legacy in your church or in your community, you've got to figure out how to creatively have relationships with people that aren't stuck in roles. How to meet people where they are. You're not the parent to the whole world. And then sometimes it's a struggle for us to let go of that role because it was so meaningful to us. Okay? So I've covered a ton of material, I know, in the last however many hours we've been getting together, but I wanted to talk about those things, and I wanted to kind of end with the whole idea that there are basically three things I want to leave you with today as we kind of close it. And I'm going to take some questions. But one is, as you leave here and you think about your relationships and you think about how you're doing in them, I want to challenge you, if you've never heard this term before, but I think probably most of you have, but I want to challenge you to be more mindful about your relationships. In other words, as you leave here, as you think about the people you're in relationship with, whether it's your kids or the person you came to the conference with, if you came with somebody, or the person you wish had come to the conference with you, work at developing a sense of mindfulness. And that is just be present when you're with people. Be focused. When you have conversations, make eye contact. Mindfulness is something that people go, it just sounds like kind of some hippie California psychologist term, Look it up. It's a rich concept. I've spent so much of my life being in such a hurry and not being mindful, not being in the moment. And I'm really working hard at stopping that behavior and trying to just be present when I'm with people and be present when I'm doing stuff and just kind of soak everything in that God is showing me and doing in my life. So be mindful. Number two, Think about your dreams in creative ways. Maybe God gave you the dream, that you are having in your life right now. And as you've thought about your dream, and nurture it and live into it. And don't be afraid of putting it out there and sharing your dream with people who are important to you, because they may help you realize your dream. And if someone's shared their dream with you, take the responsibility and the initiative and to be an encouragement and to help them discover how to make their dreams come true. And then lastly, I'll say this. Again, I mentioned this last night. This is just my own piece of advice. Ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life, because that's what will help you achieve these things and to be more present in your relationships. And start early. Start early. Cultivate these qualities, because they will bring a sense of maturity to your relationships and to your life. And you'll be able to say, I'm living a life of legacy. Amen? So questions, anyone, about what we've covered? And you can ask about anything we talked about. But let's stay germane to the whole rest of the group as opposed to our own individual stuff. Yeah.
When we learn transactional analysis, we kind of look at it, what we call the critical parent. You could be the critical parent to yourself.
Yeah.
And you still have the inner child, and you need to nurture the child within yourself when it's hurt when you're young. And it's got all kinds of good stuff that you can see that really went on. It's like, if we were, as a child, if we were hurt, you have to go back and nurture that child.
Right.
And teach that child that, hey, you can still trust. It sounds weird, but it's good stuff.
It is good stuff, and that's why I always like to go through these building blocks, because oftentimes people come into my office and they're not really sure why they're there, but they know there's something wrong. And if you can kind of pinpoint the stage of life where the interruption happened, guess what? As an adult, you can go back and do a lot of work fixing those problems. People who say, oh, you know what, I was totally messed up during the initiative stage of my life. Well, what do I do? Well, you know what? Maybe taking initiative, starting to try taking initiative, can get you that new place, maturity-wise.
I gotta say one more thing that I start to see within the Christian community. I mean, in the middle of the love chapter, it says, when I was a child, I learned.
Thought as a child, I spoke as a child.
And I reasoned like a child.
Yeah,
It's like we gotta go through this.
right.
Put that way we learn away and learn the right way.
It's awesome. I love that. Anything else? Yes, Carrie.
You recommended Gottman's book.
Yep.
Is there any, specifically around this or the stages you were talking about, is there any one
No.
person or a book or anything?
This is just my little thing right now. I mean, I don't.
So you're going to write a book.
Well, my kids, both of whom are authors, have encouraged me, but I'm super intimidated by it. But yeah, I think it would be a good idea to put some of this stuff down. We'll see what happens. I'm kind of busy these days. Anybody else? Well, Carrie was asking, as far as the stages, of development and the building blocks of maturity, is there anything written on that she could buy to kind of be more of a resource? And also about you could buy a book on transactional analysis. You can just Google that. As far as the individual, the maturity thing is just kind of my gig. That's my thing that I came up with. You could read Erik Erikson. I mean, you can go back to the original source stuff and read a book by Erik Erikson on the stages of psychosocial growth. I find it fascinating, but not everybody loves it. Yeah, Michelle. Yeah, I mean, this is going to sound very cliche and self-serving, but therapy, 2 words, therapy. I think counseling can be a great process, because it not only can expose you to some ideas, but there's somebody there to hold you accountable and to also challenge your growth. But there are also great books out on midlife, great books out on growth and development that you can Google and find. But for me, that's why I do therapy. I just think it's helpful to enter into that kind of relationship with somebody and have them kind of encourage you.
If you know somebody that you think could benefit from, how do you encourage them?
If you know somebody who could benefit from, I'm guessing, counseling, how do you encourage them? You know, the most powerful way, Terry took several courses in professional coaching a few years back. The most powerful way to introduce someone or to encourage someone where you can see a real opportunity for growth is to ask powerful questions. Rather than telling people what to do, and if you've never done it before, Google the term powerful questions. And you'll get tons of ideas about how to have conversations with people where you introduce them and encourage them to grow without coming across as this, critical parent saying, you really should get your act together. There are many other ways to do that. Yeah.
How does this differ from Piaget's?
They're both developmental theorists. How is Erikson's application different from Jean Piaget? Jean Piaget had 4 stages of development, and they were more, there's less detail for sure in Piaget's. I could go through his 4, but it really, I don't think is any more helpful than this is much more practical and I would say much more tied to lifespan. Yeah.
It's not so much a question, but a comment to the gal who was asking, how do you encourage someone to get counseling?
Yeah.
Or something. There's a game I play with kids called Spot It. Has anybody ever heard of that game? It's a card game, and they get half the deck, you get half the deck, and you flip them over at the same time, and the first one to spot the identical items on both cards, they win the cards. And then you're supposed to collect all the cards, wherever the cards win. Sometimes you're sitting there and you're staring at the cards, and neither one of you can see the objects that's there until someone points it out. And so sometimes I say, sometimes you don't know what you don't know until somebody points it out to you. I go, that's what counseling is like. And sometimes you need someone to point it out.
Yeah,
And
that's
someone
good.
who's not playing the game can point it out faster because they're not in the tension of the game.
It's great. Love it. Okay, yeah, way in the back.
You said to read the first 52 pages. Was that the 7 principles of?
Yeah. Yes, The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work by John Gottman.
And it also depends on which volume you have.
Yes. Well, if you order it now, you're going to get the new. The old one was back in the old days before this version came out. It was the first 46 pages. Now it's the first 52 pages. Yeah. The rest of the book, definitely read it. But once you get through the first 52 pages, you're going to have all this, the vocabulary I spent time talking about. It'll make the rest of the book so much more understandable and make your relationship so much more understandable because the rest of the book talks about basically 2 things: the 7 principles, and how to adapt those things into your life as a couple, and then there's also I think 2 or 3 chapters specifically on conflict, which is awesome. The last chapter or the last one is called Create Shared Meaning, which is Principle 7, and it's in Create Shared Meaning that he talks a lot more about dreams. But the one more thing I want to say about the book, and this is what I love the most about this book. Well, I love a lot of things about the book, but one of the things I really like about it is he has an index in the back. And so if you get the book and you go, well, Tim was talking about dreams. Whatever that is, look up dreams in the back, and it'll take you right to every reference in the book, or flooding, or whatever it is. Michelle? Okay. I think it's a great book too. The Relationship Cure, also by John Gottman. Yeah, very good. Thanks for mentioning that. That's great. Okay, yeah, in the back.
Tim, this is more of a comment. I just want to say, so last night, it was tongue in cheek about John and I have done tons of counseling, recovery, all this kinds of stuff, but this has been excellent. One of the things in it all about it's where are you in your life that you can receive like a lot of this information.
So true.
hear it or, but that was so huge for me, which has to do with this last part, where, what developmental place, where was I stuck,
Yeah.
And I had to kind of see, I was kind of stuck in the teenager area. So I'm just saying, depending on, depending on where, how willing are you to look at yourself and say, back to, how you said, look at yourself, And yesterday when you were talking about positive,
Positive sentiment. Uh-huh.
right. So one of our counselors used the term goodwill, that you have to have goodwill towards each other. Well, if you're honest, that stops you in your tracks.
Yeah.
You're like, wow, I can't even stand this person, much less have goodwill. I'm just saying.
Yep.
But anyway, excellent stuff.
Thank you. Thanks.
So much.
You're welcome. Dallas Willard talks about, the importance of willing good for others. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure to be here. Bob, I'll be back tomorrow morning. Look forward to seeing you then too.
If I put in one plug,
Some of you may already have been doing this, but Tim talked as he was quoting from Gottman, the whole idea of turning toward someone. That was revolutionary to me. And it's just the construct of our living room is such that we kind of joke about it. I never thought I'd be the guy with the recliner, but I'm the guy with the recliner now. It's not a big recliner, so it's kind of harder. Oh, then you're not so bad. Some are worse than me. But so I'm sitting here, and Elizabeth's usually on this couch over here. So if we're conversing, or if we're going to converse correctly, I need to actually turn in my recliner. But the other thing I found, and just a little helpful pastoral, because I love you, Tip, these things can really wreck your relationship. Because